Okay, we were at the beginning of chapter 12 yesterday where we left off. So I want to kind of do a little recap here. However, what I'm going to do, since we kind of read the beginning of 12 already, the first 7, 8 paragraphs of chapter 12, I'm going to show you a little mini map of what the route that Abram and his family took. But first, let me just simply reread from verse 1 through verse 9, okay? Then I'll show you the map. That'll kind of all make sense. The call of Abram. The Lord has said to Abram, leave your native country, your relatives, and your father's family, and go to the land that I will show you. I will make you into a great nation. I will bless you and make you famous, and you will be a blessing to others. I will bless those who bless you and curse those who treat you with contempt. All the families on earth will be blessed through you. So Abram departed as the Lord had instructed, and Lot went with him. Abraham was 75 years old when he left Haran. Okay, Haran. Remember, they lived in Ur before that. Now, that's kind of important because the map I'm going to show you covers from Ur to Haran and from Haran down. Okay, so Ur, then Haran, he took his wife Sarai, his nephew Lot, and all his wealth, his livestock, and all the people he had taken into his household at Haran, and headed for the land of Canaan. When they arrived in Canaan, Abram traveled through the land as far as Shechem. There he set up camp beside the oak of Moreh. At that time, the area was inhabited by Canaanites. Then the Lord appeared to Abram and said, I will give this land to your descendants. And Abram built an altar there and dedicated it to the Lord, who had appeared to him. After that, Abraham traveled south and set up camp in the hill country, with Bethel to the west and Ai to the east. There he built another altar and dedicated it to the Lord, and he worshipped the Lord. Then Abram continued traveling south by stages towards the Negev. Okay, so let me show you this little map I've been thinking of showing you. I'm going to enlarge it, of course, so you guys can see a little more detail. Now, Ur is over here, near basically Iraq, by Babylon, Susa, southern Ur, right over here in this area, right? So the whole family traveled up to Haran, which is over here. Turkey's over here, by the way. Turkey's right over here. So they went to Haran. This is where they stayed for a while. And then Abraham took Sarai, his nephew Lot, and a few other people, his livestock and everything. They traveled down over here. Then this traveled down, right, to Damascus, etc. The Negev is over here. This is a Negev over here. Now I'm going to show you a little more detailed map as well, so it kind of makes a little more sense. Okay, there we go. So here we go, the area that I was showing you, right? The Oak of Moreh. This is where he set up the first temple altar. Then we have Bethel and Ai right over here. So he was over here, right? Then he went to Mount Moriah, and then Oak of Mamre. He's going to travel down over here. This is the Negev area, Negev, Negev, right over here. So he's traveling down here. Where we left off last night, they're going to go to Egypt. So they're going to take this route over here to Egypt, okay? And then when they come back, they're going to come back the same route. They're going to end up over here, same place as before, after Egypt. We're going to read that in today's session. But here's where they separate. Lot and Abram separate. You'll see the story in a little bit. I'll read it to you. But this is where Lot goes this way to the area of Sodom and Gomorrah, to a little town called Zoar as well. You're going to hear all about these little towns as well. I think it makes a little better sense when I show you what's happening. Okay, so there we go. Now, verse 10. We're going to continue there where we left off. Let me get my notes ready here. talk about a famine that's going to happen here. Okay. Now, what we just read, just going to refill you in on a little couple of details here, just so everything is in context. God had called, and Abraham at that point responded, right? Now, though he could see nothing that would encourage him to obey God, he trusted and stepped out into the unknown. He's never been to the area that he's going to, or even to where he's traveling at this point. He's never been there ever, ever, ever. Now, looking at Abram, one would not judge him likely candidate to receive God's great promises. Like I said, mentioned yesterday, Abram came from a family of idol worshippers in the land of Ur. They worship a lot of different gods right there. And at this time, he was 75 years old when he left Haran. Now, so, by the way, Sarah and kids Sarai was 65. But I wanted to go into what we're going to read right now, just a little bit beforehand, because it'll make a little better sense. Because we're going to kind of read the first, another 10 paragraphs, and we're going to take a little break and explain. But we're going to talk about some deception going on here, okay? Abram is going to go to Egypt, land that he's never been to before, right? Now, he figures that the Pharaoh that he's going to encounter is not the same Pharaoh that we're going to see later with Moses. Pharaoh is more like a title instead of a name. Now, apparently, Sarai was a very beautiful woman. God had guided Abram to Canaan and had promised to give the land to his descendants. We just read that. But the land had become so parched, it did not produce vegetation needed for survival of people and animals. So because of the shortage of food, Abram decided on his own to proceed to Egypt. He didn't consult God. That was his first mistake. Now, there will be plenty of food, of course, in Egypt because of the Nile River. Remember the Nile River? Very big river. So usually Egypt was one of the lands that would not be affected too much, not too much by when you have severe famines in other areas, especially in Canaan. They really wouldn't be bothered that much. Now, because of the shortage of food, Abram decided to go on his own without God's blessing to Egypt, where there would be plenty of food. Instead of seeking God's direction, Abram made his own plans. He would not settle in Egypt. But only stay for a while. His heart was not at peace as he moved across the desert towards Egypt. Even then, he looked at Sarai, who was beautiful, and knew the Egyptians would be attracted to her. He feared that they would destroy him in order to have Sarai. Not to solve the dilemma, Abram told her to tell the Egyptians that she was his sister. Well, technically, she was, in fact, his half-sister. But, the plan seemed to work well. Sarai's beauty so appealed to the Egyptians that she was taken into Pharaoh's palace. Abram had crafted the deception, right? That it may be well. Genesis 12:13. With him and as her brother, quote unquote, he was treated so well that he was able to expand his wealth by accumulating more sheep, more cattle, more donkeys, more camels, male and female servants, a lot of extra wealth. When we obey God, he assumes responsibility for the consequences of our obedience. When we disobey God, we assume the consequences of our actions. Now, while Abram's plan seemed to be working flawlessly at first, God was also working out his own plan. He plagued Pharaoh and others in the palace with great plagues. We're going to read that in verse 17. Now, being superstitious, Pharaoh surmised that what had happened and called Abram into account. When Abram confessed his deception, Pharaoh banished him from the palace and from the country. Abram left with Sarai and all the wealth he had gained. Now, in 1947, there was a discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls. Hidden in a cave near the Dead Sea was a scroll which contained an interpretation of Genesis chapter 12 through chapter 15. It includes comments on Sarai's beauty, even describing her features. It's very, very interesting. Now, let's read a little bit here. At that time, a severe famine struck the land of Canaan, forcing Abram to go down to Egypt, where he lived as a foreigner. As he was approaching the border of Egypt, Abram said to his wife Sarai, "Look, you are a very beautiful woman. When the Egyptians see you, they will say, 'This is his wife. Let's destroy him. Then we can have her.' So please tell them that you are my sister. Then they will spare my life and treat me well because of their interest in you." And sure enough, when Abram arrived in Egypt, everyone noticed Sarai's beauty. When the palace officials saw her, they sang her praises to Pharaoh, the king, and Sarai was taken into his palace. Then Pharaoh gave Abram many gifts because of her: sheep, goats, cattle, male and female donkeys, male and female servants, and camels. But the Lord sent terrible plagues upon Pharaoh and his household because of Sarai's, Abram's wife. So Pharaoh summoned Abram and accused him sharply. "What have you done to me?" he demanded. "Why didn't you tell me she was your wife? Why did you say she is my sister and allow me to take her as my wife? Now then, here is your wife. Take her and get out of here." Pharaoh ordered some of his men to escort them, and he sent Abram out of the country, along with his wife and his possessions. Hold on a second, please. Let me fix this. There you go. Sorry about that. Okay, so Pharaoh was through with Abram, right? But God was not. He did not let Abram's lapse of faith keep him from fulfilling his plan for Abram. Now, he's going to be returning to the promised land. Abram is going to build an altar, showing his desire to be brought closer to God. There's a reference that we're going to read about right now in verse 1 and 2, which is part of Psalm 86, verse 15 through 17. I'll read it to you. "You, O Lord, are God, full of compassion and gracious, long-suffering and abundant in mercy and truth. Oh, turn to me and have mercy on me. Give your strength to your servant and save the son of your maidservant. Show me a sign for good, that those who hate me may see it and be ashamed. Before you, Lord, have helped me and comfort me." Now, when we are not listening closely to God, he sometimes uses difficult circumstances and even the rebuke of an ungodly person to put us back on the right path. We should resist the temptation to get angry when these things happen. As George MacDonald said, God is bringing us to perfection, and he'll stop at nothing to get us there, no matter the cost. Sometimes we have to be rebuked and disciplined when we do dumb things. So before we get into 13, a little preview. God engineered circumstances himself, God did, to bring Abram back to the promised land. Abram had gone to Egypt to escape a famine on his own accord, right? Now, through deception, he escaped destruction and accumulated great wealth, actually. Now we see what happens after Abram returns to the place where he had built an altar to the Lord God. For Abram, it was an opportunity for a new beginning once again. As we turn now to chapter 13 and even 14, hopefully we'll get to there today as well, we're going to see how Abram interacted with his nephew Lot over grazing space for their large herds. Though Abram had rights and certainly should have had the choicest part of the land, Abram should have, right? He did not try to work things out on his own advantage. Instead, he allowed Lot to make the choice. Now, God can use even family disagreements and difficult interpersonal relationships to actually accomplish his purposes. Purposes more far reaching than to merely Abram's family. God was working out his plan for a nation and the whole world. Okay, let's do it. Yeah, I gotta read you some more of my notes here. Just because there's a lot of information, I don't want to leave you guys out. Just after Abram's obedience to God's call, in verse 10 through 13, a famine tested his faith. God, of course, would deliver him and his family, even though Abram foolishly used deception instead of trusting God while in Egypt. Now, so in other words, for a while there, Abram was not walking by faith when he went to Egypt. He stopped building altars to God. You notice that little detail? He didn't build any more altars. So deception took center stage. Now, question is, I mentioned this briefly, but just a little more detail. Why did Abram choose Egypt? Well, the Nile River provided lots of water, so it was often the last region to suffer from famine. Now, Sarai was 65 years old at this time, but she eventually lived to be 127. And like I said, Pharaoh, some people think, well, is this the same Pharaoh that Moses encountered? No, not at all. Pharaoh is a title. It's not really a name. It's a title. So I want to make sure people understand that part. So Abram left Egypt and traveled north into the Negev, along with his wife and Lot, and all that they owned. Abram was very rich in livestock, silver, and gold, by now, of course. From the Negev, they continued traveling by stages towards Bethel, and they pitched their tents between Bethel and Ai, where they had camped before. This was the same place where Abram had built the altar, and there he worshiped the Lord again. Now, Abram had already a lot of resources, like animals and other things. His experience in Egypt increased his wealth and power. You see how God can work even through different circumstances. Now, Abram could have told, is going to be able to tell Lot where to go, right? And he could have told Lot to find his own place. But his generosity was an act of faith. He knew even if he gave this land to Lot, God will still provide. Now, Abram did not have to cling to things, whereas we're going to find out that Lot's choices were very self seeking and selfish without concern for Abram or faith in the Lord, unfortunately. Let's see. So, let's see. Here we're going to go a little more. Lot, who was traveling with Abram, had also become very wealthy with flocks of sheep and goats, herds of cattle, and many tents. But the land could not support both Abram and Lot, with all their flocks and herds living so close together. So disputes broke out between the herdsmen of Abram and Lot. At that time, Canaanites and Perizzites were also living in the land. Finally, Abram said to Lot, "Let's not allow this conflict to come between us or our herdsmen. After all, we are close relatives. The whole countryside is open to you. Take your choice of any section of land that you want, and we will separate. If you want the land on the left, then I'll take the land on the right. If you prefer the land on the right, then I'll go to the left." Lot took a long look at the fertile plains of the Jordan Valley in the direction of Zoar. The whole area was well watered, everywhere like the garden of the Lord, or the beautiful land of Egypt. This was before the Lord destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah. Lot chose for himself the whole Jordan Valley to the east of them. He went there with his flocks and servants and parted company with his uncle Abram. So Abram settled in the land of Canaan, and Lot moved his tents to a place. Now, notice the details here. Lot moved his tents to a place near Sodom. I'm gonna see how that's gonna change in the future a little bit. Okay, remember he moved to a place near Sodom and settled among the cities of the plain. But the people of this area were extremely wicked and constantly sinned against the Lord. So after Lot had gone, the Lord said to Abram, "Look as far as you can see in every direction, north and south, east and west. I am giving all this land, as far as you can see, to you and your descendants as a permanent possession. And I will give you so many descendants that, like the dust of the earth, they cannot be counted. Go and walk through the land in every direction, for I am giving it to you." So Abram moved his camp to Hebron and settled near the oak grove belonging to Mamre. There he built another altar to the Lord. So Abram went to Lot, said that they should part in order to avoid the quarreling, right? When he offered his nephew the choice of the land, Lot chose the well-watered plain of the Jordan and pitched his tents near Sodom, a city known for its wickedness. Now later, we're going to find out in a little bit, later he said to Abram and promised him the land, including the fertile plains that Lot had chosen. Now, the wealth that Abram and Lot had gained while in Egypt did not bring peace and contentment. Not at all. In time, their herdsmen, the people that worked for them, began to quarrel because each group wanted the best grazing area for their employer in what was a small area of land at this point. The disagreement escalated to striving and would become explosive if something was not done about it. So, what did Abram do? Abram took the initiative to bring peace. He confronted the problem and dealt with it. Approaching Lot, he pointed out that quarreling was not appropriate because he and Lot were brothers, technically, family. The time had come for the two to separate. Confrontation is uncomfortable, but when it is handled constructively, people assume responsibility for the choices they make. Now, in a gesture of unselfish generosity, Abram told Lot to choose what part of the land he would like for himself and his many possessions. Lot shrewdly noted that it would be greatly to his advantage to take the well-watered plain of the Jordan River. It was clearly the choice most favorable to him, so he asked for it, shamelessly violating the custom of deference to one's elders. Like I said, he was a little bit selfish at this point, but it's going to bounce and bite him. Abram agreed to the division of land, and the two men parted company. Abram could have wondered. He could have said, sure, I was unselfish in giving Lot the first choice, but how smart was that? He could have thought that. But Abram stayed in the land of Canaan, while Lot lived among the cities of the plain. Eventually, he pitched his tents near Sodom. The area was beneficial for his livestock, but the neighbors were not suitable for Lot and his family. The men of Sodom were exceedingly wicked and sinful against the Lord. There was more. Now, there was more. By settling near Sodom, Lot had moved outside Canaan. He had chosen to leave the area God had promised to give Abram. That's a very important point to consider, especially a little bit later. Abram's camp was suddenly peaceful. No problem, right? Quarreling between the herdsmen had stopped, but question is, at what price? Now he was alone. He had allowed his nephew to rip him off from the very land God had promised to give him. While Abram had opportunity to reflect on his situation, this is when God spoke to him. A short while before Abram and Lot had looked over the land available, north, south, east, and west. Now the Lord told them to repeat the scan, north, south, east, and west. God was promising to give to Abram and his offspring all that he could see in each direction. Now, more than that, God promised Abram to multiply his offspring so that they would become uncountable multitudes. Then God challenged Abram to walk through the whole land in the sure knowledge that God was giving it to him. Then Abram moved his tents near the shade of trees at Mamre, at Hebron. I showed you the map earlier. Then there he built an altar to the Lord. His relationship with his nephew Lot had changed. His relationship with God remained unchanged. Now, two new aspects are highlighted in God's promise to Abram. God had previously said Abraham's descendants would inherit the land. Now, he promised that Abraham himself would have it. Two, God had previously said Abram would have descendants. Now he said Abram would have many, many of them. In fact, an uncountable multitude. There's a couple of little details that we have to acknowledge at this point. All right. Let's go to chapter 14. Yeah, this will be an interesting situation where Abram rescues Lot. Okay. Chapter 14. About this time, war broke out in the region. King Amraphel of Babylonia, King Arioch of Elazar, King Kedolamer of Elam, and King Tidal of Goyim fought against King Bera of Sodom, King Birsha of Gomorrah, King Shinab of Admah, King Shemeber of Zeboim, and the king of Bela, also called Zoar. Now, this a couple of things here, but let me read you a little to this point over here. This second group of kings joined forces in Siddim Valley. That is the valley of the Dead Sea. For 12 years, they had been subject to King Ptolemy, but in the 13th year, they rebelled against him. So basically, these four kings of the south were already kind of sub-indebted, or they had to pay money to King Kedorlaomer up in the north, and they decided to rebel. So what happened? There's four big kings who marched down and fought and took over the land, and eventually fought the five smaller kings of the south. So far, it's basically a skirmish, like a war, typical of ancient politics. Powerful kings formed a coalition to capture and control smaller states, who would eventually pay them tribute money or protection money. Now, this was North versus South. 4 powerful groups against 5 smaller groups. But it was mainly Kedorlaomer's war. He had previously defeated the southern kings about a year earlier, making them pay tribute of asphalt, olive oil, and copper, to be exact. I like the little details sometimes, I like the little details. Now, when you read about this passage reads like next week's news magazine. An army attacks, innocent citizens are taken captive, their goods are seized, right? They are at the mercy of their captors. Now, will anyone come to their rescue? Wrong. Choices bring consequences. Lot experienced this. He also experienced God's grace expressed through Abram. Now, the prosperity that Lot enjoyed in the area of Sodom was rudely interrupted when 4 kings from the east descended on them. Now, the kings, I want to kind of tell you a little bit where they're from, but, a little more details. For 12 years, these 5 kings have been subject to Kedorlaomer, king of Elam, right? The 5 smaller kings. Kedorlaomer was king of Elam. Now, finally, they rebelled against his suppression, and they're prepared for battle. But it was a very, very bad plan. As they fled before the 4 kings, some slipped into the tar pits in the valley, while the rest escaped to the mountains. The 4 warrior kings from the north swooped down to capture the people of Sodom and Gomorrah, carrying them and their possessions away. Now, nothing is as common to the history of the human race as war. The earliest surviving monuments, known as steles, tells of wars. Steles were like stone monuments that people would write things on to record history. They record a lot of cases of war. The earliest surviving monuments, known as steles, tells of, again, many wars. The earliest pictures shows wars. In fact, the earliest of all historical records was a Sumerian bas relief from Babylon around 3000 BC. It shows soldiers fighting in close battle order, all with shields and helmets. Now, one captured man escaped and ran to report the bad news to Abram, that Lot was captured. We're going to read that right now. Suddenly, Abram is going to be thrust into the role of a general. No longer was he merely a wealthy gentleman, cattle rancher. If you're going to notice, he called 318 of his trained and trusted men and pursued his captured nephew, going as far north as Dan, some 140 miles away. With courage, strategy, and strength, he attacked at night and recovered all the loot, Lot, his possessions, and other captives. While when Kedorlaomer's men took flight, Abram chased them north to Hobah, which was another 100 miles north of Dan. God equips people of faith to do his will. That's something we have to remember. Let's read about that now. Then the rebel kings of Sodom, Gomorrah, Admah, Zeboim, and Bela, also called Zoar, prepared for battle in the valley of the Dead Sea. They fought against King Kedorlaomer of Elam, King Tidal of Goim, King Amraphel of Babylonia, and King Arioch of Eleazar. 4 kings against 5. As it happened, the valley of the Dead Sea was filled with tar pits. And as the army of the kings of Sodom and Gomorrah fled, some fell into the tar pits, while the rest escaped into the mountains. The victorious invaders then plundered Sodom and Gomorrah and headed for home, taking with them all the spoils of war and the food supplies. They also captured Lot, Abram's nephew, who lived in Sodom. See the detail now? First, he moved near Sodom, right? Now he's actually living in Sodom. See how sin encapsulates some people? And carried off everything he owned. But one of Lot's men escaped and reported everything to Abram the Hebrew, who was living near the oak grove belonging to Mamre, the Amorite. Mamre and his relatives Eshcol and Aner were Abram's allies. When Abram heard that his nephew Lot had been captured, he mobilized the 318 trained men who had been born into his household. Then he pursued Kedorlaomer's army until he caught up with them at Dan, way in the north. There he divided his men and attacked during the night. Kedorlaomer's army fled, but Abram chased them as far as Hobah, north of Damascus. Abram recovered all the goods that had been taken, and he brought back his nephew Lot with his possessions and all the women and other captives. After Abram returned from his victory over Kedorlaomer and all his allies, the king of Sodom went out to meet him. The king of Sodom went out to meet him in the valley of Shaveh, that is the king's valley. And Melchizedek, the king of Salem, and a priest of God Most High, brought Abram some bread and wine. Melchizedek blessed Abram with his blessing. Now, I'm gonna tell you a lot of information on Melchizedek tomorrow. Right now, I want to keep this in context with the story, but I'll tell you a little bit right now, just a little bit, okay? Now, first of all, something I want you to remember. Remember whenever I read you, even Samuel and even Matthew tell you, remember this name. It's going to pop up later. Well, here, notice something here. The king of Sodom went out to meet him in the valley of Shaveh. Okay, the king of Sodom. There's something we don't want you to remember that name. The king of Sodom. Look what's going to happen to him, with him and between him and Abram. Now, this next guy, Melchizedek, this is a very, very enigmatic, very mysterious person. Nowhere in the whole Bible, it mentions him a lot here and even a lot in the New Testament. However, nobody knows where he came from. Nobody knows where he was born. Nobody knows if he was married. Nobody knows if he had any children, any other people around him. Nobody. Nobody knows when and if he even passed away. Nobody knows that either. And ironically enough, he's the king of Salem, which is basically old school Jerusalem. Jerusalem had nothing to do with God at that point. Nothing. We're going to read later when we go into after Moses brings the people to the promised land. Even then, which is about almost 1,000 years later, Salem is still occupied by ungodly people called the Jebusites. So here's a very mysterious situation here. Who is this guy, Melchizedek, who was a very godly man, right? A priest of God Most High. Who is he? I keep asking a rhetorical question because no one knows who he is and who he was. There's only speculations. Now, so that's something to remember. I want you to remember because tomorrow we're going to do a little deeper study on Melchizedek by himself. But remember this guy, Melchizedek. because there's a few things. He's a king of a very ungodly city named Salem, which will eventually become Jerusalem. Now, he is a priest of God Most High. He's not honoring or worshiping other gods from that area, not at all. But God Most High, the one and only true living God. Now, something else. He brought Abram some bread and wine. Bread and wine, same thing as the Last Supper. Keep that in mind. Melchizedek blessed Abram with his blessing. Blessed be Abram by God Most High, creator of heaven and earth. And blessed be God Most High, who has defeated your enemies for you. So here, this guy, Melchizedek, acknowledges the one and only true living God, right? He blesses Abram with bread and wine. Very, very symbolic. Just remember that. And so then on top of that, he gives them this blessing. People call it a prayer, but it's a blessing, right? Again, he acknowledges creator of heaven and earth, Abram's God, God Most High. And blessed be, he gives honor and blessing to God Most High, and he acknowledges that he defeated the enemies for Abram. And look what else happens. There's more. Then Abram gave Melchizedek a tenth of all the goods he had recovered. Notice Melchizedek did not reject them. We're going to see something about rejection a little bit later. But Melchizedek accepted the tenth of all the goods. Tenth is another word for tithe. That's where the word tithe comes from tenth of all the goods he had recovered. So who would you give your tithe to? To a regular guy or to God? Question. Okay? Who acknowledges God Most High, creator of heaven and earth, the Lord, right? Just a couple little things. Who has something to do with bread and wine in the New Testament? The Lord. Talking Jesus Christ, of course. Some people assume, some people misconstrue, or maybe correctly identify Melchizedek as a form of Christophany. Christophany is when Jesus Christ, our Lord and Savior, appears in the Old Testament before he was Jesus Christ. Christophany. Many times in the Bible, in the Old Testament, we'll read about the angel of the Lord. Angel of the Lord, right? And some people will even worship the angel of the Lord, and the angel of the Lord will accept it, right? Because he is the angel of the Lord. That people misconstrue that or assume, and correctly so, by the way, that he is an angel of the Lord is a symbol for God, the Lord. Some people say God the Father. They say the Lord Jesus Christ. But something called a Christophany is when our Lord Jesus Christ appears as somebody, okay? Not obviously not Jesus Christ yet by name, but as somebody that resembles and identifies as the Lord. So I just want to just put all those things in the oven, let them simmer, right? We're going to talk a little bit more in detail about Melchizedek tomorrow. But there's a lot of beautiful things about this guy. He's talked a lot in the book of Hebrews as well, and other places. But just remember Melchizedek, that name. Now, remember the king of Sodom? I told you to remember him? Look what happens here. The king of Sodom said to Abram, "Give back my people who were captured, but you may keep for yourself all the goods you have recovered." Abram replied to the king of Sodom, "I solemnly swear to the Lord, God Most High, creator of heaven and earth, that I will not take so much as a single thread or sandal thong from what belongs to you. Otherwise, you might say, I'm the one who made Abram rich. I will accept only what my young warriors have already eaten, and I request that you give a fair share of the goods to my allies, Aner, Eshcol, and Mamre." Now, there's a few things to unpack here. I think you guys get the idea here, right? But I want to just want to identify a few things here so it makes a little better sense. Abram knew. That's what I told you to remember the king of Sodom. Abram knew by accepting the offer of the king of Sodom actually could make him his ally or a subject, just as Lot had become. This would jeopardize the fulfillment of God's promise if Abram would have accepted anything from this guy. Now, So in other words, faith looks beyond the riches of the world to the greater blessings God has in store. Something very, very, very important. Okay. So now, like I said, another little fun little fact I told you earlier, how, secretly, not secretly, but in increments, Lot had moved near Sodom, and then he suddenly was living in Sodom in chapter 13, verse 12, and in chapter 14, verse 12. It just how the enemy works, Abram was always considered righteous, and even Lot to some extent, but Lot had his sometimes he listened to his human side more than other times. Okay, let me see here. See if I have other notes. I think I have some other notes here to share with you. Now, Abram had a stunning victory over the enemy kings. We read that. As he returned to his tent, a weary general, thankful for his pursuit of the enemy, had been so successful, he could not have guessed what God had in store for him. Abram had an unexpected encounter with Melchizedek, king of Salem, later called Jerusalem. We covered that. Who was also the priest of God Most High. Abram may not have been acquainted with Melchizedek, but Melchizedek knew Abram. Keep that in mind. Melchizedek greeted Abram with bread and wine and a blessing that revealed his knowledge of the living God. While accepting the blessing expressed by Melchizedek, Abram gave him a tenth of all the goods he had recovered from his rescue mission. Abram was heralded as a hero. The king of Sodom tried to strike a deal with him. He suggested that since Abram had returned the captives, he was free to keep for himself all the goods he had recovered, right? Here was a legitimate opportunity for Abram to be rewarded for his heroism. In fact, by rights, the goods and the captives were his. But Abram rejected the offer. He told the king of Sodom that he had already promised the Lord that he would take nothing from a thread to a sandal strap as a reward. That's in 23, right here. Abram did not want the king of Sodom to take credit for adding to his great wealth. Remember, Abram already had a lot of great wealth. He had a lot of men they could fight for him. He had a lot of animals. He had a lot of gold and silver and other resources. All Abram was willing to accept was the food that his troops had already consumed in their hot pursuit of the enemy. When God prospers our efforts, we should give him all the credit and not covet rewards from the ungodly. We can be sure that God will honor the glory that we give to him. Important note to consider there. Okay, let me see. Okay. Let me see. There's something you might want to read to you right now. Let me go to my other page here. Yeah, I think we're done right now. I want to save that. I don't want to confuse you guys. Let me see this one here. My little notebook here. I want to be able to do some puzzles with you, some quiz. Hold on. Yeah, I have some notes about Melchizedek I want to share with you tomorrow. If I did it right now, it would probably take about 20, 30 minutes, and I don't want to take away your time because I want to do the puzzle. I want to do those quizzes with you. Okay, yeah. So I think we're done for right now. We're going to end right here at chapter 15.